beginning of the final episode of season 2, we see Lestat defend Claudia and say arguably one of the best lines of the entire show.
You have no idea of Claudia's strength.
However, I wrote down a few others because I love me some poetry. This line made audiences, Redditors, and netizens alike second-guess themselves and wonder whether Lestat ever loved Claudia. Does visibly feeling guilty for someone's death equate to loving them when they were alive? To answer that question, we have to rewind to season 1, episode 4. When Claudia starts to adjust to her life as a vampire, we see scenes of Lestat, Louis, and Claudia having the time of their lives. They're jumping together and dancing and watching movies together and laughing, and it seems like there's a lot of potential for a strong and loving bond between two strong personalities. However, the rocky start of their relationship always lingered in the background. It was always a problem they would eventually circle back to, yet never overcome. Claudia never chose to be a vampire and had to live with the fact that Louis, and especially Lestat, her maker, chose for her. She was not only breaking one of the great laws based on her age, she was also just too young to even make that kind of decision or to even go through something like that. One can argue that the reason why Lestat made such a decision was to make Louis happy. He really didn't want a vampire child companion, but he did it to make Louis feel better about the guilt and shame that he had been carrying around for quite some time. Because of Lestat's lack of wanting Claudia around in the first place, yet wanting Claudia to blindly worship him, it marked the beginning of Lestat and Claudia's murky father-daughter, maker and fledgling relationship with a very weak foundation and a competitive nature. It was this notion of power versus powerlessness. We see that from the start when Lestat makes the decision for Claudia to live forever when she should have decided that herself. We also see that when Lestat withholds information from Claudia about his life, his past, and other vampires, and the way that Lestat underestimated her because of her age, her appearance, and her lack of life experience. We also see this creator versus creation imbalance when Lestat is unable to know what Louis and Claudia are talking about telepathically, and when Lestat feels like he has to fight for Louis' attention, especially when Claudia disappears for 7 years and Louis almost refuses to acknowledge Lestat outside of looking for her, and then the minute that she shows up, he is ready to leave the country for her and abandon his life with Lestat. Claudia refusing to be controlled in the same way that Louis was the main source of their issues. She didn't seek his approval or guidance like Louis did, nor did she want to be by his side all the time. She wanted freedom, new experiences, and a lifelong companion. Unfortunately for her, Lestat was hesitant and reluctant to give her either of those things. Maybe his strict parenting tactics were coming from a misplaced sense of love that Lestat got as a child from his father, or as a young adult and a baby vampire from Magnus. Nonetheless, Claudia demonstrated to Lestat that he can't control everything around him, he can't lean on his control freak nature to fix every problem, and that terrified Lestat more than anything. The reality of being a vampire truly hits Claudia when she meets Charlie, a boy that she clearly liked a lot and could have even loved but accidentally killed. And it probably didn't help that Lestat forced her to watch his body being burned to ashes. Claudia really didn't have the necessary tools to deal with his death and couldn't handle the harsh and lonely existence of being a vampire. Lestat and Louis probably didn't help enough with that or didn't know how to. To be fair, Louis had his own stuff going on with his family, and Lestat was likely too preoccupied with his eternal lover to really tend to Claudia in the way that she needed to be tended to. Neither Claudia nor Lestat were innocent. They both plotted and weaponized trust, and they could never give one another what they each wanted most. Since they both had bad childhoods, they probably felt like this was the only way they could survive in the same house together. On one hand, we have a narcissistic immortal who needed devotion, and on the other, a brilliant eternal child who refused to submit. Although they didn't have much in common, they both wanted to be chosen, yet they never wanted to choose each other. Ultimately, their relationship collapsed because it was never a relationship to begin with. It was simply possession and occasionally brutality. Ironically though, when Lestat had her stoned, as Claudia put it when placing her on a brutal trial and then having her brutally murdered, we see his character start to change. We see him going inwards, trying to distract himself, and when he finally sees Louis in the final moments of the second season, we see him crying and racked with guilt over her death. More importantly, we see him regret not being a better father figure to her. And it's heartbreaking to think that Lestat was the final person Claudia saw and looked to before being burned to death. Maybe Lestat treated her a certain way or underestimated her because he wanted her to be better and saw so much of himself in her. He saw her potential and wanted to challenge her in his own twisted way. Maybe he never felt worthy enough to have a good relationship with her because of his own broken relationships with his own family. But the elephant in the room was the fact that Claudia was forever stuck in a premature body and had to cope with not only Lestat underestimating her, but everyone else around her as well. This was her Achilles heel, the chip on her shoulder that she had to carry for the rest of her life. Maybe it was hard for Claudia to even look at or tolerate Lestat because she knew he was the reason for this burden that she had. To answer the question, Lestat wanted to love Claudia, but they were just set up for failure. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, leave me comments, talk to me. I have no friends. I will see you next time. I love you. Bye.